George Hand was born in 1830 in rural upstate New York. He left his family and friends behind in 1849 at the age of 19 to be a miner 49er in the California Gold Rush. He dabbled in gold mining for over a decade, but never had much luck in the endeavor. Then, in the fall of 1861, George got a steady job. When the California Military Department started raising troops for the Union Army, George Hand was among the first patriots to enlist. Despite having no prior military service, Hand was made a sergeant in Company G of the 1st California Infantry Regiment. Maybe it's because he was older than most of the rank-and-file soldiers in their teens and 20s. He enlisted in San Francisco in September 1861. That same month, he took a steamship down to Southern California, where he landed at Camp Drum, near present-day Long Beach. Then he went to Camp Wright for basic training. Camp Wright was in northeastern San Diego County, where the rolling grassy hills and orchards meet the edge of the desert. This camp was started as part of the Federal Army's logistical supply lines and was also vital for cutting off Southerners trying to leave California across land to join the Confederate Army. Amazingly, it took 5 months for George and the other miners and loggers to soldier up and finish basic training. Then, in March of 1862, Company G was integrated into the California Column and began the march to Arizona to push out the Confederate Army. They made the march across the desert from Camp Wright to Fort Yuma in 10 days, averaging 16 miles a day on foot. Imagine that march across the desert in a dark wool uniform, plus a pack and a heavy long rifle. That's insane. Because the California Column was staggered to prevent the desert wells from going dry, Company G arrived in Tucson in August, 3 months after the Federals took back the town. By August of 1862, the rebel army was out of Arizona and New Mexico, but the West Coast Yankees now had a different war to fight. Here are a few entries from Sergeant George Hand's wartime diary. You may be familiar with some of these diary entries from past videos I've done, and others included here will be new to you. But here they all are in one video and in chronological order. This is how Sergeant George Hand, Company G, 1st California Infantry Regiment, spent the 4th of July of 1862 while deployed to western Arizona. He writes in his diary, "The 4th opened very brilliantly. The colors were raised at sunrise. No guns were fired until 12 noon. 1/2 cup of patriotism was issued to each man in the garrison. Officers, not being men, got none. It's rather singular that at a post like this a copy of the Declaration of Independence cannot be found, as there was nothing done here. About half the command procured passes and crossed the river to Colorado City. The last heard of them they were drunk and fighting. On the whole, this is the most miserably spent 4th within my recollection. It is like everything in the Army, miserable in the extreme. The officers are to have a great time this evening, with the scrapings of the half-breed Spanish ladies to dance with. How it will be this evening remains to be seen. Part of the guard went over to arrest or stop fighting." Sergeant George Hand of the 1st California Infantry Regiment shows us how going to war is 1% sheer terror, 99% sheer boredom or exhaustion. This is a typical day patrolling western Arizona. July 21st, 1862. We left camp at 2 o'clock a.m. Dust was very bad the first few miles, then we had good walking. Traveled at the rate of 3 miles per hour. Arrived here in Gila City about 7 in the morning, distance 14 miles. In 10 minutes after our arrival, we were all in the river, some with clothes on, others off. Water very shallow. At the time of the high water last winter, the town was 5 feet underwater. 3 miles from camp we stopped, took a bath in the river, started on again. Some parts of the road good, others very sandy and bad traveling. We went on until we were over 11 miles, then cursing and swearing was the order of the night. Rested several times and finally arrived in camp at 12 o'clock midnight, tired and vexed." This is Sergeant George Hand, Company G, 1st California Infantry Regiment, and this is just one day of his combat deployment in western Arizona. He writes in his diary, July 28, 1862, "We were roused by the breakfast call, bread and coffee again. After eating, we packed up and started up for dust and bad roads. About 4 miles in, we saw the body of a dead Indian hanging by the neck, shot by one of Grinnell's partners. He's talking about King Woolsey. Shortly after daylight, I saw a large drove of sheep, wild. Some of the boys shot at them. They were too far off. The next place of note is the top of the hill going into Oatman Flat. This is where the Tontos murdered the Oatman family after helping them up the hill. Farther on, in the bottom, the grave of the family is still to be seen. This is a large valley surrounded by high mountains or tableland. We camped here, where the station formerly was. Sergeant George Hand served in Company G of the 1st California Infantry Regiment during the Civil War. During his combat deployment in western Arizona, he wrote a fascinating description of the Odam people in his diary. We know them as the Pima Indians. He writes on August 4th, "Fried pork and corn for breakfast with coffee, baked bread. Went 2 miles down the river, caught no fish. We have inspection of arms and an issue of cartridges this afternoon and leave at sundown. I wrote to Corporal Tom Wallace. These Indians are very expert gamblers. They beat all the celebrated gamblers of our company. They are now nearly all engaged in harvesting mesquite beans. They fix it up so that it tastes and looks much like desiccated potatoes. Boiled corn and coffee for dinner. We had inspection of arms at 4 o'clock, and the orders now are for no man to fire off his gun unless ordered or something strange happens. Filled our canteens and left this camp, which was Pima Station, at 5:30. The Indians were sorry to part with us, but we left, and their shouts of adios amigos drowned even the bray of the mules. We traveled pretty fast and in close order. The captain was pretty well tired out and told us to go slow. We arrived at Oneida at 9. September 9th, 1862. A party of Apaches attacked the people of San Xavier. Several were killed, and the Indians finally routed. Express arrived from Apache Pass this morning. 25 from 1st Cavalry left here this evening for the head of the column, taking Dr. Wooster's wife. September 10th. Express left for Apache Pass, and 1 arrived from Yuma. We had a heavy rain and windstorm, which made me hunt new quarters. The colors on the flagstaff were stripped from stem to stern. Private Hull of Company D, 1st Infantry, died. September 13th. The picket guard has come in. Nothing seen, but heard horsemen riding in great haste. It was nearly guard mount when the cry of Apaches was heard through the town. The alarm among the Sonorans spread like an electric shock. Men looking pale were running, some with shotguns, others more able had rifles and 6-shooters. The women and children were very much frightened. The long roll sounded, and the troops were instantly under arms. Company G, 1st Infantry, and E, 1st Cavalry, started in pursuit. We were put on the wrong track and saw no Indians. Returned in 2 hours after leaving. They were a dirty and muddy lot of fellows. They were at the double quick, 2 miles without stopping, over marshes, cornfields, ditches, and arrived at a grist mill a few moments after the cavalry. Guard mount, 10:30 a.m. A detail of the 5th Infantry and 1st Cavalry started off for some lumber belonging to the government, 40 miles distant. Several men were killed there the other day, 1 American named Ward, and 2 or 3 Mexicans. When the California Volunteers deployed to other states and territories, they brought this state holiday with them. Sergeant George Hand of the 1st California Infantry, which captured Tucson from the Confederates in May 1862, wrote about the holiday in his diary. On November 27th, the California soldiers in Arizona broke off into smaller groups or mingled with locals to have Thanksgiving dinner. Later that evening, the California Volunteers held a ball in Tucson for all citizens to attend, where there was champagne and dancing. Soldiers were required to retire at taps, but whether all of them did or not is another story. For this special holiday episode of the Civil War Wild West edition, we check back in with our friend Sergeant George Hand of the 1st California Infantry Regiment. We are entering December of 1863. This will be the 3rd and final Christmas that Sergeant Hand spends in the Union Army. At this time, the California Volunteers are already occupying New Mexico, liberated from the Confederate Army, and West Texas. Sergeant Hand's company is in Fort McRae in southeastern New Mexico, near the Texas border. At this stage in the Civil War, the Confederate Army has already retreated to East Texas. The Union soldiers occupying southeastern New Mexico and West Texas are up against a mostly inactive Confederate insurgency, occasionally arresting a Confederate sympathizer here and there, but they have been very busy against a highly active Apache insurgency lately. As recently as November of that same year, Sergeant Hand writes about skirmishes with different Apache guerrillas. However, December has been a very quiet month. Even on boring days, Sergeant Hand will make some kind of a note that nothing noteworthy happened, or how bored he or the other soldiers are, but between December 7th and the 22nd, there are absolutely no entries. Then the diary picks up again on December 23rd. So here we have Sergeant Hand, in his own words, describing how he spent the holidays, starting from right before Christmas all the way through the New Year. December 23rd. The posts on the river are all broken up, meaning the little vedette stations to buy things. December 24th, Christmas Eve. No whiskey to be had. The captain would not sign orders for any. December 25th. Christmas passed off very dull, but towards night, whiskey was found where soldiers always find it, and Company G was nearly all drunk and noisy until morning, when a cold snowstorm drove them all to bed. December 26th. I went to Fort Craig, and a hard time we had on the Jornada. The wind was terrific, and snow and dust blinded me. It was so very cold that we could not ride our horses. There are no entries for December 27th, 28th, or 29th. December 30th. Had a good time at the fort with Smith and the others. Left for home on the 29th. Stayed in Paraje that night. All my detachment and escort drunk, except Creevy. Started next morning and arrived home the evening of the 30th. December 31st. Great preparations are being made for the first day of the new year. We have killed 3 50-pound pigs and intend on having a grand time. Late in the evening, Corporal Bradley went out and succeeded in tapping the commissary. He brought in a canteen of the fluid, which Corporals Argust, Bradley, Privates Wallace and Creevy, with what little help I afforded them, disposed of in a very quiet manner. Went to bed and slept the old year out. Reveille introduced a new one. January 1st, 1864. We are now on the last year of our enlistment. Time passes slowly but surely. We are all very busy getting ready for dinner, which is at 1 o'clock. I sent an invitation to some cavalry boys at Alamosa. The table set and loaded with such things as we could get, such as oyster soup, roast pigs, stuffed pies, cakes, gingerbread, nuts, and raisins, with plenty of El Paso wine to wash the dry stuff down. Everything went off well. The best thing of the day was the captain's toast, which was, as near as I can recollect, as follows: "Fill up your tin cups and all rise." He then stretched out his arm full length, and with a faltering voice and trembling frame, pronounced these immortal words: "Is it not a splendid thing for an officer of the American Army?" Well, I'm almost ashamed to remember it, as it came from my captain, but as we are not very friendly, it may not be out of place, so here it is. But first imagine a man unused to speaking or giving commands, and nearly scared out of his wits. Here's to Company G, who from danger never flee. May they live in prosperity, and be discharged in native America. I have no doubt but that he felt very proud of that. If he did, I'm glad to please him once. And that is how Sergeant George Hand and the boys of Company G, 1st California Volunteer Infantry Regiment, spent Christmas and the New Year at Fort McRae, New Mexico. Sergeant Hand was honorably discharged from the Union Army in October of 1864.
This is a taste of how Union soldiers celebrated the 4th of July during the American Civil War. What you're about to hear comes directly from the diary of Sergeant George Hand, Company G, 1st California Infantry Regiment, and he is writing from Fort McRae, New Mexico. July 1st, 1864, Friday. After getting straightened around some, commenced preparations for the celebration of the 4th of July. July 2nd, no entry. July 3rd, Sunday. On the 3rd, we killed a pig. July 4th. On the 4th, we formed a parade by the flagstaff, everything being ready to send up our colors. For the 1st, we hoisted her to the breeze. presented arms and commenced the salute with a howitzer brought from Fort Craig for the purpose. Then, 3 cheers for the Union and all belonging to it. After the salute, we were invited to Lieutenant A.J. Fountain's quarters to partake of some beverage in the shape of whiskey punch. I then went with Snyder and Straub to eat dinner. Oysters and tomatoes, roast beef, duff and cake, after which we took some champagne with Lieutenant Fountain. Paul Clark and Consor arrived in time to get some of our dinner, etc. The day passed off very well, considering all things. Our Mexican soldiers were making threats, and some of them went so far as to get out their muskets to come down and kill us gringos. Lieutenant Fountain went and told their officer to take care of his men, and if they came below a certain point, our boys would kill the last Mexican in camp. 6 or more of them were confined, bucked, and gagged. That ended the row. Yikes. Well, that probably went in a direction you weren't expecting, but that is something that happened. You just heard about racial tensions boiling almost to the point of violence in the Union Army, and in other videos I've discussed racial tensions boiling to the point of violence in the Confederate Army. Well, it was 19th century America, definitely far from perfect.
I hope you enjoyed hearing these selections from a Union soldier's wartime diary from the Southwest. Sergeant Hand served in Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas before he was honorably discharged in the fall of 1864. He ended up settling in Arizona, and he continued keeping a diary where he described daily life and conditions in the Wild West as towns in the Arizona Territory were growing. Thank you for watching the Civil War, Wild West Edition. If you haven't already done so, please hit like and subscribe and leave a comment. It really does help out this channel with the algorithms. Have a great day or evening wherever you are.